Welcome to the Student Affairs One Thing New Professional, a podcast that asks a simple question of new professionals in the field. What is one thing you have learned you feel will help you as you move forward in your career? I'm your host, Stuart Brown, the developer of studentaffairs.com, one of the most accessed websites by student affairs professionals. On our pages, we have the most cost-effective job posting board, listing hundreds of open student services positions and a wide range of webinars. On today's episode, I am very pleased to have Sam Yang, a former area coordinator in residence life at the University of Vermont and currently a doctoral student in educational leadership at the University of Southern California. So Sam, what is your one thing?
Having worked in student affairs for the past 4 years and started off teaching, I think my one thing is communication. And I want to base that communication skills that stem from staff meetings during the time that I worked in residential life. I think the reason why I chose communication is because as student affairs professionals, we communicate on so many levels, not only with students, but with student staff, parents, other staff members, faculty, and administrators on the college campus. And oftentimes we find ourselves communicating with student staff because that's who we supervise on the team, that's who we work with on the team in a close quarter for extended period of time. Staff meetings is something that I pride myself right now, but I did not acquire the skills to successfully facilitate staff meetings at the beginning of my career. The reason for that, it being student staff, namely residential advisors and graduate students, they are aspiring adults. They're aspiring student affairs professionals. They're aspiring professionals. So they will understand partially the administrations and the policies of university, but they will ask challenging questions. And sometimes these challenging questions, they don't always make sense. They're not always reasonable. They are still cultivating the skills to be able to communicate effectively and rationally with other adults or student staff on the team. So for me, I had to really hunker down and anchor myself in terms of like, how do we communicate effectively with students, student staff when, for example, unpopular policy on COVID given by the university, or when we have to go through and face and challenge and address the problem, but we don't have the solutions to it yet, or there's ambiguity that we have to work with for a short or a long period of time. And then this is where I try to really put in my leadership skills of using active listening and also being able to hold the space and take the space as needed to kind of manage the flow.
Was there one time where that light bulb went off in your head and said, you know what, staff meetings and the way they're organized and presented, et cetera, are important?
There's definitely a couple of instances. I wouldn't say maybe one staff meeting that triggered everything, but let's say the aftermath of COVID, when we came back in person in 2021, schools are juggling with, okay, what's the policy for social distancing, masking, and interactions on campus? And then we had some policies that were not as popular when, announced to the students. And then that definitely was not our fault as, residential life staff members. So we have to discuss those. And there were a lot of ambiguity within those policies. So my RAs came in to the meeting furious. Right. So it was my job to make sure that I came up with a solution to address how this policy is enforced on our campus and then to minimize that ambiguity as much as possible. Now, my supervisor didn't give me that instruction, but I felt like to be able to really effectively lead this team, I need to be able to utilize that staff meeting time to establish some grounds to be able to have the team work with at least with some clarity and some transparency. But it turned out to be disastrous. Students, the staffs were furious, they were angry, they were making statements rather than asking questions. They were suggesting things that are way out of the realm, that were really unrealistic and sometimes just, I would call it crazy. I was able to, with the help of my graduate assistant, kind of hold down the space and making sure we made some improvements on the set policy and to reach a ground where everybody is kind of satisfied leaving the space. But that's when I realized that you can make so many changes happen in the staff meeting, because this is when student staff, they came in here, they're trying to learn from you. But in the meantime, I'm also trying to learn from them. It's an exchange of ideas. It's where leadership skills really shine. And then, that couple of staff meetings in the beginning of the school year definitely was something that I wish I had gone in more prepared.
When you talked about staff meetings as your one thing, that really resonated with me because I've been in this field for many, many years. And I'm going to say most professionals have no clue how to run a staff meeting. It's on the books, so we have to do it. But like what you were saying, well, you prepare for the meeting, you're looking for outcomes and how can there be resolutions? And sometimes you go to these staff meetings and you're just, why are we sitting here? So I think it's so great for that one thing, for not only for you to develop, but people listening to this podcast to think, okay, I maybe need to do more when I'm going into a staff meeting, whether I'm the leader or a participant, because the participants, that's what the word means. You participate. You can't just sit there. And then also at the end, when the facilitator says, okay, who wants to take this responsibility, to maybe raise your hand, because it's kind of silly to have a staff meeting if there's no to-do list after, and you come back the next week and have the same meeting and you just go over the content again with no resolution.
So for me, what I've learned from staff meetings as one thing is, as a leader, I can take the space, but I can also release the space and really see how my student staff can self-facilitate a staff meeting, or what they want to take away from it, not what I want them to take away from a set staff meeting.
Sam, I want to thank you with sharing that one thing. I think it's so important. Having a staff meeting, chairing a staff meeting sounds so simple, but if you don't put the work in, if you don't practice, it can be, as you said, a disaster. So I think that's a great one thing for people in the field to make sure they work on.
If I may add one thing, we always joke about, oh, this whole meeting could have been an email. My goal for my leadership career goal in the future as a student affairs professional is to make sure that nothing like that happens in my team, that people genuinely come in enjoying the staff meeting and looking forward to it.
You have been listening to the Student Affairs One Thing New Professional, a podcast that asks a simple question of new professionals in the field. What is one thing you have learned you feel will help you as you move forward in your career? My guest today has been Sam Yang, a former area coordinator in residence life at the University of Vermont and currently a doctoral student in education leadership at the University of Southern California. I'm your host, Stuart Brown, the developer of studentaffairs.com, one of the most accessed websites by student affairs professionals. I hope you will join us next time for another episode of the Student Affairs One Thing New Professional.